Ik word zo geholpen met het. Or should be available at this URL, tinyurl.com. Press 0604, today's date. So you can see all the spoilers already, all the funny pictures. So you don't have anything to laugh about. So you can focus on the presentation. Okay, it's 2:05, so I think I better start. Thank you for coming to this presentation about generating dummy content with Migrate. As I said, you can find the slides online. What I'm going to talk about is the following. First, we'll have a quick look at what dummy content is for me and for you. Why to use it, how to generate it, and then I'll look at a couple of tools like default content, Migrate default content, Devel Generate, install profiles, and Migrate itself. And then we'll finish off with looking at some code examples and a very quick demonstration. Little thing about myself. My name is Boris Doesborg. I am from Utrecht, which is in the Netherlands. I'm a Drupal developer at a company called Finalist, which is more than 10 years building Drupal websites for its clients, and we are a supporter of the Drupal community. We contribute modules and we sponsor events. You can find me as Batigolix on Drupal.org. And this morning I discovered a funny link between Ghent, the city of Ghent, and Utrecht, because I didn't know it existed, but as I found it out just an hour ago, so I had to add it to the presentation. It's completely useless information fact, but I still share it with you. But this is a small detail of one of the most famous paintings in the world. It's the Ghent altar piece. It's here in the cathedral. And just in the middle of the picture, just above the lamp, which symbolizes Jesus, there is a picture of Utrecht. Yay! Our cathedral is there. So probably those people here in Ghent must have thought someday that heaven would look like Utrecht, which is kind of surprising to me, but they did. Nowadays, they are much more normal, I would say, people here. But I like to add this to the presentation. It has nothing to do with the topic. Dummy content. You could call it demo content or default content as well. It depends on the way you are planning to use it. For the presentation, I will talk about dummy content, but you could give it other names as well. What I understand under it is like everything that you want to have available as soon as you start your website. So it could be pages, users, taxonomy terms, and it's not only nodes. So it should be content between quotes. It's more than nodes. It's menus, it's paragraphs, files, media, everything which isn't configuration in Drupal. One thing I would like to add to dummy content is that I, as a developer, I want this to be in text files, so it can be under version control and it can be deployed to several environments. So it has to be text files as well. So why would you use it? The main reason is testing. When you do testing, automatic or manual testing, you want reliable and predictable data. And by providing dummy content, you always have this. It's reliable, it's predictable. So if you take a tool like Backstop.js, it will compare screenshots from a before and after situation. After you've done a change, it will compare these screenshots, and you want to focus on CSS changes or errors in configuration, but you don't want the content to be different in those two situations. You want the content to be the same, so you can use dummy content to ensure that you have the same content every time. And for manual testing, if you have delivered a new functionality and you want your client or your colleague to test this, then it's very nice and useful and helpful if you already provided the content which needs to be tested. Maybe together with the user or a role and a password and everything, so they can easily test what you just created or changed, whatever. Another reason to use it could be theming. You should think about having menus and blocks, headers, footers, and all kind of possible combinations of paragraphs. You can pre-fill this. You can provide this for your colleague who has to do the designing and the theming. You can deliver the whole package, and he can start working on it. He will be very happy with you, hopefully. Obviously, in demos and distributions, you need dummy content because you have to show off your product. So you need it there as well. The last thing is that sometimes you have this starting content. For example, taxonomy terms. You could have a website that depends on certain topics to be available in the website. You can ensure they are always exist by using this dummy content. Okay, how do you get these? There's many modules that will help you generate dummy content. I only will talk about a small selection. We have default content, another one called the Migrate default content, Devel Generate, well-known, realistic dummy content, install profiles, which are just core, that can be used for this as well, and Migrate tools. And if you ask Google, then there are 8.5 billion ways to generate dummy content, so there's many, many more. So I'm adding here a small warning here because I'm used to work with Migrate, and I think it's a good tool. It's suitable for this job, but so I'm a bit biased already. So you have to be a little bit careful with my words in this case. Anyhow, the first module that provides dummy content is called default content. That's what the name is. It will create entities when you install it as a module or as a profile. Nice thing about this module is that it has an export function, so you can just use Drupal to create your taxonomy terms, your users, and your nodes, and then use this module to export everything into a JSON or a YAML file, and you can choose the format. It will also take care of references, so if you have any paragraphs of taxonomy terms in there, then it will export these as well. The not so good thing about this module is that these YAML files, they're not really suitable for manipulations, for creating them manually, for changing them. So I will show you in a second. So you always have to use the Drupal UI to generate the dummy content. But it's pretty good for moving the content from one environment to the other. But it's lacking a way to update this content. So you have to constantly reinstall the module, which is very slow. I hope this is kind of readable. Not very much, but yeah, you can see a YAML file. You can see that these various fields are defined in here. It's pretty readable, but you should also be able to see I have a mouse pointer here. that it's full of UUIDs to refer to other entities. And this is the kind of stuff that you cannot do manually. So for this reason, I think it's not possible to create this kind of dummy content by hand. So another module which does a very good job in this is called Migrate Default Content. It tries to do more or less the same thing, but then with Migrate as the underlying module. So it creates and updates these all kind of entities, and you have to use drush. You have to use drush commands to actually execute this. You can do all kinds of updates all the time, so that's good. And it's very suitable for writing it manually in your text editor. So that's helpful there. So it makes it's a good tool for creating predictable, reliable content on different environments. But it's like a simplification of Migrate. So you almost have the right tool already, but you're using some kind of a simplification. So you're missing out a lot of options that Migrate is already using. So I do not understand completely why this exists. There may have been a case where the non-technical people had to write these dummy content files. So I would, if you're so close to Migrate already, then I would immediately switch to that. This is what the YAML files for Migrate default content will look like. You can see it's very readable. It's very easy to edit in your text editor. This is doable for everybody. I'm switching to one of the most well-known dummy content generators. It's been around for a long time. It's Devel Generate. It's part of Devel. It creates and deletes entities. You have a nice UI for that. You can do it with drush as well. It will provide you with totally crazy and chaotic content on your website, which makes it not so suitable for like manual testing or for delivering new features, because your colleagues and your clients will not recognize a website with Devel Generate generated content in it, because it's weird stuff. It kind of it takes advantage of your mistakes. So if you have a text field where you allow 1,000 characters, then it will fill it with 1,000 characters. And but because it does it, it's a good tool for testing your field configuration. It's also good for very quickly generate a lot of random content, but it's not so realistic. So there's a couple of other Devel Generate sub-modules or related modules have been developed over the years. One of them is realistic dummy content, which will put will put stock photos into your website, and it will try to find texts, files, and image files in your custom modules, which it will try to use to populate fields with. So this results in much more realistic dummy data. We'll give a quick example of this first. Devel Generate. There's a drush command which shows you how you can very quickly create lots of content. What realistic dummy content does, it will scan through your custom module and look for a folder which has the name of a file, and you can put your text files and your image files in those subfolders, and it will pick one of those files that it finds to populate your fields. Using this, you can get much more realistic content in your site. Then you can also create an install profile for generating dummy content. It creates them when you install the profile, but it's as you can see in Drupal core, it's a lot of code to write to create the entities, because you have to do everything by hand. There's not really a tool available there, so you have to do all the entity saves and everything. You have to write those by hand. If you want to see examples, you should have a look at the Umami profile, which is in Drupal core. And that brings us to Migrate tools. They allow to create, update, and delete entities, and you do that using drush commands. You will have to write your own YAML migration files, which has to contain all the information that's needed to generate the dummy data. And these files are, I would say, more or less readable and writable. It's doable. I will show here 2 examples. Not sure if how visible they are. It's more or less okay. You can see on the left hand there's a migration file for creating nodes. My mouse pointer is there. So yeah, you have a title field, a body field. It's quite it's readable. I will go into these files a little bit more in detail in a second. The only thing I want to prove here that this is the kind of text files that you can manage in a text editor without a lot of problems. On the right hand, you can see a migration file that will create menu items. You see it, title, links. So this is the kind of stuff that is manageable, I would say. Now, Migrate is the purpose of Migrate used to be to import data from databases, or, for example, an XML file. But there's a couple of innovations, I would say, recently that make it possible to use it as well for generating dummy content. Most important is that nowadays it's possible to have migration definitions as plugins. So plugins instead of configuration. Drupal core will look in your custom modules and will try to find folders in there that are called migrations, and we'll look in those folders to see see if it can find any migration definitions, and it will load these as soon as you do a cache rebuild. In the older situation, you had to do a config import, which was much slower. So now you can change your migration definition, do a cache rebuild, and it's immediately available. Second innovation, I would say, is the existence of the embedded data source plugin. So normally, Migrate would like to get its data from an external source, like SQL database or a CSV file. But with the embedded data source plugin, you can tell Migrate that all the data that needs to be imported is in the same configuration file. So that makes it more manageable, I would say. And last, the module Migrate tools, which allows using drush commands to execute migrations, which is necessary for development. And I can show some of the code and then do a very quick demo. So what do we have here? Text editor, and I'd say pretty readable files here. It's readable also in the back. Yes? Okay, very good. What do you see? I've got my website here, custom modules. I've got a module called dummy stuff. I've got a folder in there which is called migrations. That's what I said. Drupal core will look in there and load all the migrations it can find there. I'll start with the simplest one, then work bottom up to something a little bit more complicated. First migration contains users. There's a little bit of metadata here, but important to see is the embedded data plugin. Is this readable or not? You have better eyes than I have. Okay. Okay. Important to note here is the embedded data plugin, which tells Migrate that all the data is in the same file. So in data rows, I have all my items that I would like to import. So in this case, there's 4 users. Note also that there's all the users have different roles. Migrate always wants to know what the ID is. Well, in this case, the ID is called ID. Not so difficult. And then the rest is pretty standard Migrate stuff. It wants to know the destination. So in this case, these will become users in Drupal. And then there's the process part where the data is mapped on the Drupal fields. So what I have defined as email in the data rows will become mail in the Drupal user entity. For example, this is all pretty straightforward. The only exception there would be the password, which is being passed through a filter, so it's encoded in the database. Well, and this will give you 4 dummy users. They're always the same, so they're reliable and testable. Next migration would be taxonomy terms. They're also pretty straightforward. They only have a name. That's it. And the name is also the ID. So the only thing that Migrate then wants to know is where to put this stuff. They should be taxonomy terms, and they have to go into the tags vocabulary. That's enough. So slightly more complicated, but still quite simple. I have a migration that contains a couple of paragraphs. This is a very simple paragraph. It has a header and a body text. I called this paragraph a text paragraph. I think it's one of the most common paragraphs that will exist in every website ever. Good to notice is the ID that these paragraphs have. These are arbitrary, of course, and I call them text 1, text 2, until text 4. So there's 4 paragraphs that I can use in other migrations. So later on, I'll show you a migration for nodes, which will refer to these paragraphs, and it will use this ID. Let's see, I showed the users, the text, the tags. Okay, another basic one is a files migration. If you want to populate an image field, then Drupal first wants to create file entities. So you have to do a separate migration for these entities. So this migration will take care of creating 4 files in Drupal. I have to give them separate IDs, and I'll tell them what the name is of the image that has to be imported. These images, they are waiting to be imported here in a files folder. I think that's visible, yes. The whole processing of files in Migrate is a little bit more complex, but what you see here is pretty standard, so it's well documented all over Drupal.org, so I will not go into this. So then we have files then, so we can have a look at the first node migration. So this is a migration that will create a couple of basic pages. Actually, there's 4 basic pages. The page has a title, an alias, and 2 paragraphs. In the data rows, they are called content items, and there's 2 IDs that refer to the text paragraphs that have been generated before. So while processing this, the most interesting part here is that there's a field called field content, which is a entity reference field. It will loop through all the content items that I have defined, which are, in this case, I have defined 2 of them, and I gave them IDs. And while looping through that, it will look up these IDs in other migrations. The plugin that's being used here is called Migration Lookup. I have to tell Migrate that it has to look in the migration, which is called texts, and I have to tell what the ID is like. And this is enough to link those paragraphs to the node. Almost there. There's a migration which will take care of news articles. There's 2 news articles in here. They're a little bit more elaborate than the other examples. So we have title, alias, and then we have a file ID, which will be used to populate the image field. And you can also see that it has a couple of tags. We're not using IDs here, but just the names of the tags. That will be enough to look them up and make the link between the node and the taxonomy terms. So we'll have a quick look at the image field. Again, I'm using here the migration lookup plugin, and it will use the file ID to find the entity in the files migration. In the taxonomy term field, which is called field tags, it will also use the migration lookup plugin, and it will just use the name of the taxonomy term to find it in the to find the right term. All right. Yeah, then there's only one little thing left, which is a little bit of decoration of the website. We want some menu items. There's no link with other entities in here. The only thing that's important is that if you create a menu link in this way, that it needs to exist. So that means that this migration depends on the pages migration. That has to be imported first, because otherwise these aliases don't exist. Other thing to note here is that some of the menu items will go into the main menu and others will go into the footer. So that's an example of a small module which will provide some dummy content. To go back to the browser and have a look at the website. So let's see, refresh this. Yeah, I knew this was going to happen, but I'm prepared. Thank you. Oh, I see my password. Oh my God. Okay. Let's try this again. Well, if a demo doesn't fail, it's not a good demo. So it's better to fail than this. Oh, so what we're looking at is a pretty boring website. There's no content. There's no users. Well, there's one made by Devel Generate, but there's not much here, and especially not my dummy content. It's not there. We switch to the terminal, and then we use Migrate tools to have a look at migrations that exist in this website. I think I have to resize this a little bit. So Migrate status tells me that there's a couple of migrations waiting. It recognizes the items that are inside, but they haven't been imported yet. So now the import demo, which is extremely short. Sorry for that. Yeah, because it's quite simple data to import. So that's done. So now it should have populated my website with my dummy content. So here are my 4 new created users. Nice to see that they have different roles. Another thing we could have a look at are the taxonomy terms. They've been generated. They're all here. As you can see, we have some content. We have some content. We still have it. Okay, these are my 4 basic pages, my 2 news articles. They've been added to the website. So now have a quick look at the website itself. So we have news articles on the homepage with their image fields and their taxonomy terms. And yes, there's menu items, some in the header and also some in the footer. And these the menu will take you to some of the basic pages, and you can see basic page, it has 2 paragraphs. It's not very elaborate, but still you can recognize that these are 2 paragraphs. Of course, you have to work a little bit on this and make it a bit more exciting, but I think it's a simple example which shows what I am trying to say. Okay, a couple of more notes before I can finish this off. Okay, one of the things you have to be aware of that if you work like this with migrations, that every entity has to be migrated as separately. So if you have a node that contains a media paragraph and media items and files, you have to provide separate migration files for each of these, which can be a little bit abstract to work with. Another problem that I walked into that I wasn't able to generate any blocks. So if anybody is good in creating blocks using Migrate, then I would love to know how to do that. And there's no UI, because you use the migrations as plugins, then they are not visible in the Drupal UI. That's an issue. I don't know if it's being solved. I have no idea. But then there's a nice point. When you use Migrate, you have all kinds of other options, possibilities. You could also try to use CSV files to generate lots and lots and lots of dummy content, which is easier in CSV than in YAML. Other things to figure out, I haven't been working with this for a long time, only in 2 projects, so I think it needs a little bit more time to work with this and find out what the drawbacks are and advantages, disadvantages. I have not been able to apply it to different kind of automatic tests, so it's usable in Backstop.js, but maybe could be used in Behat, for example. I don't know yet. I have to experiment a little bit with the Entity Generate plugin, because it will allow you to create entities within the migration file, so you don't need this file inside file inside file. You can keep it, make it a bit more compact, have less files. I haven't tried it out, just thought of it. And then something that I would like to make is a Git repository where I store all these migrations, because they are dummy content, so they should be reusable in other projects within our organization as well. So it's something to work on. And if you have any ideas, I would love to hear them. And in the slides, there's a list of some resources. There's a nice article. There's a good video on this. There's a GitHub repository with tons of migrations that use the embedded data plugin, which is very interesting. And the code from this demonstration is also on GitHub, so you can find the links in the slides. And then I would invite you to ask at least a couple of very smart questions, because it's good for the video. So I hope anybody has a question. Not yet? Yes. Oh, wait, I have to throw it because it looks good. Okay? Very good. Does it work?
I don't know. Yes.
Okay.
Have you ever experimented with a layout builder, and do you know if it works with inline blocks?
No, I have not. Is it? Does it? Do you need special links between your entities for that, or not? Is there anything in between?
Layout
because
builder,
this is all about linking entities with each other. So
layout builder actually is like the custom block entities, but then inline blocks, special typed, and they are bundled into sections, and those sections are linked to the.
Yeah, but the sections are entities or not?
No, it's like a blob, a JSON blob, with all references to block IDs.
Yeah. Well, I think Migrate is able to create all kind of Drupal content. So I have not worked with it. No, I thought the paragraphs were already quite complicated to achieve.
Did you do any tests with configuration management? Since this could answer both questions, the one with your blocks and paragraphs, the only sensible way of migrating that is putting it in the configuration management and injecting it in the other side. Assuming there is some...
Yeah, well, I in this case, I assume that you just export all your configuration from one side to the other. So it's necessary for this whole story that all the configuration is available on all your websites, especially on the test website. Yes, you can create a lot of blocks using config. Yeah, but you also have the custom blocks, right, in Drupal, and I tried it. I had to give up because I didn't have enough time to figure it out. But of course, blocks in config, that's no problem at all. That's a completely different story.
Yeah, right. Yeah. But if this Devel Generate would be able to write at this block location and later be replaced with the real content, that could really work maybe. But you didn't test that part either.
No, I tried to create blocks because I was thinking if a themer wants to start working on the website, it might be nice to already have a couple of blocks out there. But while you're still figuring out which kind of blocks you need or whatever, you can already put something in there. She can start theming the block title and block content. So yeah, that's what I was trying to achieve. I don't think it's impossible, but
it's not.
You need to have a lot of time at your hand. Okay. Anyhow, any more questions or 3, 2, 1, last chance? Okay, nobody? Okay, then I thank you all for coming to my session and being so patient, and thank you very much. We'll see you around. Bye-bye.